With dreams of a world-class distillery fresh in his mind, Dr. Inking starts looking around the area he has found himself in. His escape pod had some standard survival gear in it, including some packaged meals and a taser, for one never knows who they will encounter upon landing on an uncharted planet. He also arrived with 4 bottles of beer which he had stashed inside his lab coat, just for emergencies. Spotting what looks to be some fertile soil upon the banks of the nearby river, he immediately moves to set up nearby. He will need to grow a lot of crops, both for food and for fermenting into drinks, so being near fertile soil is a must. Perhaps a little too eager to get started on making booze, he immediately plans out a field of rice, for food, and a field of hops, for beer. Only after he's happy with his planned fields does he turn his attentions to shelter, realising he will need to survive a while in order to make his distillery a reality. While Doc makes a start on his shelter, let's get to know him a little better. This is Dr. Inking. I know what you're thinking, and yes, his parents did name him Doctor. They had very clear expectations for him from the day he was born. Doc grew up on a glitter world, the son of wealthy parents. With their extreme wealth, they had very little to worry about, so turned all their concern onto ensuring that their son matched their expectations. The intense pressure on him to be the best from an early age had led him to be quite neurotic. He was forced down the path of medicine from the start, as his name would suggest, eventually becoming a surgeon in adulthood. However, while out enjoying his first beer with colleagues from the hospital, he found his true passion: alcohol. It made him feel incredibly free, like he could fight the whole world, although he'd never actually been in a fight. The demanding nature of his job left little time to indulge his interest in botany and brewing beyond reading books on the topic, but he had always dreamed of creating his own alcohol to share the joy it brought him to others. Being used to living life on an extremely advanced glitter world colony, he immediately starts planning out all of the little home comforts he expects from his shelter, instead of focusing on simply finishing the shelter to keep the rain off him. As a result, he's unable to finish the shelter on the first night and spends it sleeping on the ground in the rain. Not learning his lesson, even after a night on the cold damp ground, he starts planning out an ensuite bathroom before he's even finished the shelter. It's safe to say that Dr. Inking doesn't have the greatest survival instincts. He does, however, have a burning passion to start producing his booze, so maybe that will carry him through the discomfort his impatience causes him. At the end of the second day, still not having put a roof on his shelter, he sits down at his table with a warm beer to congratulate himself on what he perceives as a job well done. You're not going to make this very easy on yourself, are you, Doc? His construction skills are somewhat subpar, leading to numerous botched jobs. As the only one around to build things, he will have to learn fast though. On the third day, he finally finishes his shelter. Don't worry though, before finishing it, he made time to plant the field of hops, which was clearly a higher priority. Realising that you may be crossing the river regularly in order to reach the fertile soil on the north bank, Doc creates a short wooden bridge which will allow him to traverse it easier and with less soggy boots. While he's out and about, he encounters his first need to use the taser. A mad rat has decided to pursue him with murderous intent. He initially struggles to get to a safe distance to utilise the taser. The last thing he needs is to accidentally tase himself. After stunning the rat, and panicking on what to do next, he decides to beat it while it's stunned, killing it quickly. Although he was never that passionate about medicine, he's more than capable of patching up the few scratches he received in the process. Doc's impatience got the better of him again, and, instead of planning out any of the other things he may need to survive, such as a place to cook food, somewhere to relax, stockpiling resources, or a power source, he instead begins planning out the first room of the distillery, on the banks of the river. Just as Doc finishes the roof of the distillery, a heatwave descends upon the area. It's about to get roasty toasty. Not long after, a raider from the pollution crew arrives. Doc hadn't been expecting any issues as he was just minding his own business, but he was suddenly very happy for the taser. The raider had a pistol, so Doc kept himself hidden until he was sure he could reach the raider with the taser. He lands the stun with the taser and immediately begins beating on the raider. He's never been in a fight before, but it turns out it's quite easy to win one against somebody who's been incapacitated. Unsure how to handle the situation now, Doc locks the raider away in his toilet until he can figure out his next steps. Feeling bad about the beating he gave them, Doc patches up the raider, named Rena. He then has a sit-down chat with her to discuss why she tried to attack him. Rena tells Doc a bit about the surrounding area. He set up his base in the centre of a number of settlements by factions which are likely to be openly hostile to someone new in the area. These include Jaguar's Desert, a settlement belonging to the Crazy Deadbeats; Erashaw, an encampment of the Green Inlet settlement; Moyle Pugwop, a village of the Pound faction; and Uraton, a settlement of the Bonua faction. They were unlikely to be openly hostile, but would require some convincing if Doc hoped to have their assistance. Thanking Rena for the information, and determining that she wasn't too badly injured, he released her from the toilet and let her return to her people, hopeful that this act of kindness might earn him a slight reprieve from their attacks. With so many hostile factions nearby, Doc was worried he may be in a worse position than his initial optimism had led him to believe. But, after a short moment of worry, he found reassurance in his love of booze. Surely, if he was able to create good enough drinks, he could convince these factions to be his friends. He would endeavour to brew the best drinks he could, so that he'd bring all of these factions together in their love of his booze, and protect himself from their wrath in the process. As Doc sleeps that night, he dreams of wooden floors in his shelter, which he elects to add, as soon as he wakes up and realises that already having them was just a dream, that is. Just as his stack of survival meals are running low, his rice is ready for harvest. This is the first time he's managed to grow something himself, despite years of academic research into the subject, and he's immensely proud of himself. The joy of harvesting the rice puts him in a great mood, which for Doc means more daydreaming. With his hops due to be harvested soon, he decides that he simply must have a pub in which to enjoy the beer that they'll make. So he begins planning out a large riverside pub where he can invite people to indulge in his booze. Building the pub will take a bit of time, however. With all the construction, the planting, the harvesting, along with all the other smaller tasks he needs to do each day, finding time to also cut down and stockpile timber is proving difficult. Doc plans to construct a research table in the distillery so that he can research new ways to get himself drunk. While dreaming, the next room of the distillery also comes to him. The initial room will be where they process the crops. The second room will be the fermenting room, where the drinks are stored in casks until they're fermented enough to get people drunk. Now that his primary source of food is rice, he elects to construct a small fire outside, where he can cook it into proper meals. It's not ideal, but there's lots of wood nearby, so keeping the fire going shouldn't be too difficult. With the fermenting room roofed, it can surely only be a short time before the first beers are ready, right? That's Doc's thoughts at least, and eager to ensure the pub's visitors can enjoy the beer as fresh as possible, he elects to construct a second bridge, making the journey between the distillery and the pub shorter. Doc starts constructing the first few fermenting barrels in the fermenting room, meaning he's officially ready to start making beer. And not a moment too soon, as, just that afternoon, the first of the hops are finally ready for harvesting. Doc immediately processes it into wort and dumps it into a fermenting barrel, desperate to start the process of fermenting the beer. Immediately bolstered beyond all reason by the first harvest of hops, Doc immediately decides to massively expand the hop farm, using every inch of fertile soil in the North Bank to produce as much as possible so he can flood this world with beer. It would appear that some in the area have no interest in drowning in beer, however, as a raid approaches from their betrayers, ready to destroy all of Doc's hard work. Doc waits for the raider to get close before hitting him with a blast of electricity from his trusty taser. Doc's been using wood to build so much that he just happens to have a large log with him at the time. He takes the opportunity to use the log of wood as a makeshift club with which to beat the attacker into submission. It's just as well Doc never really loved being a member of the medical profession. Someone more dedicated to saving lives may have felt bad about beating an incapacitated man to death. There will be many advantages to having an electricity supply, and with the river running right through the settlement, Doc decides he should figure out how to harness the power of the river. This will be a nice clean source of power too, so runs no risk of polluting the land where he'll be growing the crops for his precious beer. A refugee approaches Doc's settlement. She is awoken from a crypto-sleep casket all alone and with little idea of where she is, and asks if she can stay at the settlement until she figures things out. Doc is always open to helping people, so welcomes her with open arms. Her name is Sam, and upon her arrival she reveals she's also pregnant, and a little bit addicted to smoke leaf. Quite enjoying his little house, Doc elects to build an exact copy of it for Sam to stay in, just on the north bank of the river. He also decides that it would be pertinent to move the dead body out of the centre of their camp, so rushes to throw it in a shallow grave on the outskirts of the base. Sam wasn't the most skilled team member Doc could have hoped for, but she is adept at mining, which is something he's very bad at. As well as this, she can also help with general menial labour around the base to free up more of Doc's time. That said, being in her second trimester means she moves pretty slowly, so even with menial labour, she's not going to be the fastest. In typical Dr. Inking style, he elects to build a new house in a very hodgepodge fashion, and, instead of finishing the walls and bed so that Sam would actually have somewhere to rest, he instead completes some floor tiles, a couple of sections of wall, the bedside table, and a wash basin. Just as Doc begins to learn to prioritise, for the first time ever, he's interrupted by another raider from the pollution crew. As Doc prepares to engage the raider, Sam takes that moment to pass out due to her pregnancy, leaving Doc to fend for himself. As if determined to pile on the pressure, a nearby mayor also takes this opportunity to go mad and decides to attack any humans it sees. Doc manages to stun the raider with his trusty taser and rushes in to beat him with his stick. As he's engaging with the raider, however, the mayor approaches him and starts an attack of its own. Doc tries to disengage with the mayor, hoping he can open a bit of distance between them so he can tase it as well. In a stroke of luck, the raider comes to as the mayor is chasing Doc, and he attempts to attack the mayor. As they duke it out, Doc stands to the side, letting off blasts from his taser. The raider takes down the horse, which is being stun-locked by Doc, and then proceeds to try and attack Doc. Doc tases the raider once more and knocks him down with the stick. Still determined to win over all of the factions he can, Doc decides to lock the raider in the distillery to tend to his wounds until he can be sent back to the pollution crew. With the mayor downed and easily available, Doc elects to add a butcher table to the pub, where they can butcher any creatures they hunt and serve them at the bar. Luckily for the mayor, Doc and the raider had both been using blunt weapons, so it actually recovered, and, now that it wasn't hunting the humans, Doc decided to let it live. Unfortunately, the universe wasn't done with the challenges yet and struck down both Sam and their new prisoner with muscle parasites. With the pain of both a late stage pregnancy and muscle parasites, it was unlikely Sam would be able to do much to help for the foreseeable future. Not interested in wasting their precious supplies, Doc decides to simply send the raider on his way. His faction can help with the muscle parasites, that's not Doc's issue. Given how much work there is to do and how little hours they have in the day, Doc's solution is to add more work? He outlines a system of dirt paths around the camp, which he hopes will speed up their progress as they make their way between the buildings. Although building the paths in the first place will require quite a time investment. Mere moments later, his excitement gets the better of him once again, and, deciding he also wants to make wine, he starts laying out rows of dirt which he will till. Tilling the soil will increase its fertility and allow the grapevines to grow quicker. Once he eventually gets around to planting them, that is. Although she's in no condition to do so, Sam decides to let Doc know she plans to leave soon. She'd only ever agreed to be here temporarily, but telling him she was leaving when she wasn't even physically capable of doing so did feel like a bit of a kick in the teeth. Doc thought that maybe if he kept tending to Sam, she might agree to join him after all, so he put her back in bed and continued to tend to her. Soon after Sam made her decision, the fermenting room produced its first beers. Surely Sam would stay now that they had beer. Doc started harvesting the now gargantuan field of hops the next day. However, between his cooking meals, tending to Sam, collecting wood, building and planting and harvesting, it was becoming clear he simply didn't have enough time in the day to achieve what he wanted, so he immediately reduced the size of the hops field. Maybe he was finally beginning to learn. While Doc was working hard to till the soil, yet another raider approached from the north. Very selfishly, Sam chose that moment to go into labour. How rude. Doc was unable to help with the labour as he needed to deal with the raider, so things were left up to the universe. Doc's usual strategy of incapacitating his opponent before bashing them over the head with a log worked as effectively as ever, and he captured the raider. Doc was so busy putting out fires, both literally and figuratively, that it took him a moment to notice that Sam had given birth to a healthy baby, whom she had named Haxton. Unfortunately, this news distracted him from putting out fires, and his rice field burned down while he slept. Thankfully, he awoke in time to save the rest of the base. With Sam in a daze and showing no signs of wanting to permanently join Doc in his distillery, he decided he would need to look elsewhere for help, so decided to try and convince the most recent raider who had found themselves trapped here to join him, instead of just releasing them back to their own faction. As he made this decision, he left the distillery to find yet another raider attacking his camp. Maybe he could convince this one to join him too. If he hadn't beaten him to death, that is. Time for another grave! When Sam was fully healed, she decided to leave for real this time. There was one minor issue though. She'd left Haxton behind. Without his mum to feed him, he was starving on the floor of Sam's old room. Doc chose to adopt Haxton and look after him. It was the only reasonable thing to do. Ignoring a nearby mad donkey, Doc raced against malnutrition to save Haxton's life, managing it just in time. Doc soon receives a message from a nearby deserter from the Empire who wishes to join him at the distillery. Desperate for any help around the place, Doc happily agrees. And not a moment too soon, as, unbeknownst to Doc, the mad donkey he chose to ignore earlier has followed him and Haxton into the spare room and is preparing to kick his head in. Doc manages to sidestep the donkey and lead it away from Haxton outside, where he stuns it with his taser. Just as he hits the stun, the new teammate Dynapla arrives with his assault rifle and makes short work of the donkey. No time to rest, however, as the Imperial chasing Dynapla arrives and tries to take him back. Thankfully, Dynapla manages to make quick work of the Imperial, but not before they manage to land a shot on Doc, who, along with the injuries he sustained from the donkey, hits the ground. Dynapla manages to patch him up though. A little rest and he'll be right as rain. While he rests, let's meet Dynapla. Dynapla was the son of a noble house who hated his existence. When their attempts to get him killed by assigning him dangerous work failed, he ran away to join the Imperial army. Realising too late how horrific the conditions of those living under the Empire were, he fled, looking to start again. His time dealing with his family and the army had made him tough with an iron will. He also unfortunately had a very low pain tolerance though, so it was easy to lay out in a fight. Dynapla's noble birth meant that he was incapable of dumb labour, which would be a pain as they could really use somebody to haul things around the distillery. As he hadn't really expected to adopt a baby, Haxton is currently sleeping in a massive double bed, which would be better used by Dynapla, so Doc decides to build a crib for Haxton. The crib will remain in Dynapla's room, however. He's better with children than Doc, so since his skill set is limited, he will be responsible for looking after Haxton, which should free up a large chunk of Doc's time to handle other things. Doc is soon back on his feet and sets to throwing the corpses that seem to be accumulating into more shallow graves. Sam had been a dirt mole, but Haxton, her daughter, had only received her good traits, namely fast wound healing and great mining skills. These would be helpful once Haxton was old enough to contribute to the colony. However, without the negative genes, it just meant that Haxton ate more than twice as much as a baseline human, putting extra strain on their food resources. With Dynapla dealing with Haxton and the brewing, Doc was finally able to get back into the fields and plant some more rice. He was learning a lot about agriculture, now he was putting his theoretical knowledge to practice. Their first trader appeared, a combat supplier. Doc, forgetting that Dynapla was much better with people than himself, rushed over to introduce himself and trade with them. As they were combat suppliers, they were mostly interested in the weapons that Doc had accumulated from fallen raiders, which he was happy to part with, but he also convinced them to buy a lot of his beer. His hope was that, as they travelled, they could sell it far and wide, advertising it to the whole world. Shortly after speaking to the traders, a Phytician approached the distillery and begged for safe harbour from a pirate who was chasing them, offering to join the group if they agreed. Doc was well aware of the horticultural skills of Phyticians, so was only too happy to accept her into their group. The traders seemed to be enjoying the beer a lot, as, when a pirate from the Crazy Deadbeats approached to try and recapture the Phytician, they offered to keep Doc safe from the raider, to ensure that he could continue to make more of the beer. The strategy of using booze for defence was working already. The traders made short work of the raider. Now that the immediate danger was over, let's get to know our tree-based friend a little better. Pignon grew up as a lady of the castle in a medieval world before she was discovered by a Glitterworld baron who swept her away to his home planet. Upon this hyper-advanced Glitterworld, she was a quote-unquote novelist who spent most of her time partying. Hell, she might have ended up here following the destruction of the hospital ship along with Doc. All of this to say that she was lacking in a lot of basic skills. Thankfully, her people had a natural affinity for plant life, so she was still quite adept at growing and harvesting, and after dealing with the pirates keeping her captive here, she was only too happy to settle for a more quiet and peaceful life. To welcome Pignon as best they could, Doc set about putting down plans to build a house for her on the south bank, next to the pub, which at this point was still just an empty box of a building. Sadly, he'd already forgotten the lessons he learned while building the last house, and started putting down floors before walls. Another raid comes in, and, as the only one both equipped and trained in combat, Dynapla sallies forth to meet them. Sadly, as the raiders outnumber him, they manage to flank his position and take him down. This leaves only Doc and his trusty taser against two revolver-wielding maniacs. I don't know about you, but I don't fancy his chances. Thankfully, one of the raiders decides to try and kidnap the downed Dynapla, taking them out of the action. Stunning the closer of the two, Doc rushes by him to try and rescue Dynapla as he's being carried away. Sadly, Doc forgot his trusty stick, so has to resort to beating the incapacitated raider with his fists. Thankfully, Doc is able to beat the raider to death and rescue Dynapla as the other raider flees from the area, fearful of Doc's electricity and bloody fists. While recovering from his injuries, Dynapla speaks to their captive, who's currently in the throes of the flu, and they commiserate with each other over their poor health. Seemingly, this moment of connection is enough for the prisoner to decide to join the Distillery family. Doc likes to think it's because he's been sampling the stock while he's been stuck in the fermenting room and simply can't get enough though. The new team member, Than Kuara, has a lot of useful skills and some less than useful traits, which balances out a bit. She has a passion for construction, cooking and medical, all of which are jobs she can either take from or share with Doc, freeing up a lot of extra time within the group. She is also sickly, greedy, insatiable and an undergrounder, all of which are just fun ways for her to have a mental breakdown. Assuming they can keep her happy though, she'll be a very useful addition to the team. And with that, they finally had a decent sized team. Now that it wasn't just Doc, they would be able to finally get to work on producing the best damn booze this planet had ever seen. Hello guys, Tuna here, thank you very much for watching, I hope you're enjoying this series. A bit more of a light-hearted one to just have some fun, make some booze and see what nonsense comes our way. So if you're still here, thank you for making it this far. I would like to take a minute just to draw your attention to my new Patreon. I've been putting a lot of effort and time into these videos the last couple of months and I'm really loving doing it. And if you'd like to support my ability to continue making them, there's a number of tiers of support you can give over on Patreon. Loads of different rewards, such as your name in the credits, a shout out at the end of videos, having characters in the game named after you, and access to Patreon only channels on the Discord for some behind the scenes stuff. Obviously no need to support on Patreon at all. All videos will still be available on YouTube for free, so please only do so if you can afford to and want to. But please know that every bit of support is massive. I do have a lot of plans for bigger and better things for my content in the coming months, but your support will make achieving those things very, very much more attainable. Thank you very much for listening to my little plug for the Patreon. I hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you next week for the continuation of Dr. Inking's adventures in booze making.